a girl suddenly disappeared without a trace, but not long afterward, her body was found hanging inside a classroom, and behind all of this was a terrifying secret waiting to be uncovered. At an old school building in a high school, there was a legend about 7 supernatural mysteries. Among them, the creepiest one involved a biology classroom. Not long ago, late one night, a boy went into the biology room to look for something he had lost. The moment he bent down to pick up his pen, his flashlight suddenly illuminated a pair of legs, but when he looked carefully again, there was nothing there. Then, when he turned his head once more, he saw the body of a girl hanging inside the classroom, but as soon as the classroom lights turned on, the corpse vanished once again. To avoid causing panic, the school eventually sealed off the biology classroom. This incident immediately caught Miyuki's interest. She became curious about the other 6 supernatural mysteries, but one of the girls told her that the school had only solved 6 of them. The 7th mystery remained completely unsolved to this day. As they chatted, the girls soon arrived at the rooftop. There, they found the genius young detective Hajime, who loved solving mysteries. Hajime assumed Miyuki had come to see him because she had already finished his homework for him, but Miyuki told him to do it himself. That instantly made Hajime complain loudly. Just as the two started arguing, someone suddenly snatched the homework from Miyuki's hands. The person was Hajime's upperclassman Ruriko. At the same time, she was also the president of the school's Supernatural Phenomena Research Club. Ruriko said she would help Hajime finish all of his homework. However, there was one condition: Hajime had to help her uncover the truth behind the school's 7 supernatural mysteries. In the end, under Ruriko's guidance, Hajime and Miyuki arrived at the Supernatural Phenomena Research Club. There, Hajime met the other club members. First was Makoto, a high school mystery novelist whose books had won many awards. Then there was Takahiro, Ryuta, who handled filming and documentation, and finally, Tomoyo. Afterward, the group began discussing the school's 7 supernatural mysteries. During the conversation, Hajime learned that the school planned to demolish the old school building, but shortly afterward, the principal received a threatening letter signed by someone calling himself the Magician. The letter clearly stated that the old school building must never be torn down, and if it was destroyed, the deadly 7th mystery would finally appear. That was why Ruriko created the Supernatural Phenomena Research Club. Before the old building was demolished, she intended to uncover the truth behind the 7th mystery. However, after hearing this, the physics teacher Ichiro visibly trembled, because he clearly remembered that other students had previously tried to solve the mystery as well. But in the end, every single one of them mysteriously disappeared. Afterward, Ruriko told Hajime that the notebook she carried recorded everything that had happened at the school over the past 10 years. After proudly saying that, she walked away. That evening, Ruriko sat alone in the research room, flipping through the notebook. Sure enough, she finally discovered an important clue hidden within its pages. Later that night, while Ruriko continued investigating alone, a sudden earthquake startled her, but strangely enough, the earthquake instantly helped her understand everything. She immediately called Hajime. She told him that she had figured out the truth, and asked him to come to the school as quickly as possible. But the moment she hung up the phone, a shadow suddenly appeared behind her. Not long afterward, Hajime and Miyuki arrived at the school, but something felt strange. When they opened the door to the research room, it was completely empty inside. Just as Hajime stepped forward to investigate, Takahiro suddenly appeared and startled him. A moment later, Ryuta also came out. They explained that a mysterious man had summoned them there. According to him, the ceremony of death would begin at exactly 10 p.m. that night. At that moment, the school security guard Ryoso arrived. Everyone followed him to the security office and explained the situation. After hearing everything, Ryoso told them to go home first. He would personally inspect the school grounds. Hajime immediately volunteered to go with him. Soon, Hajime and Ryoso arrived at the school building. Hajime was confused. He wondered why they were not checking the old school building directly, but Ryoso explained that they could still observe the old building through the windows of the new one. Just then, Hajime noticed a flickering firelight coming from inside the old school building, and the room where the light appeared was the locked biology classroom. When Hajime looked closer, he saw Ruriko hanging inside the room. Standing beside her was a masked figure. Hajime and Ryoso immediately rushed toward the old building as fast as they could, but after arriving, Hajime discovered that the door was locked once again. The loud commotion quickly attracted everyone else. Working together, They soon forced the classroom door open, but shockingly, the room was completely empty. Hajime did not think much of it at first. He assumed it was just one of Ruriko's pranks, but early the next morning, they discovered a crowd gathered around the old school building. Hajime hurried through the crowd. The first thing he saw was a group of candles that had already burned out completely, and above those candles, Ruriko's lifeless body hung from the ceiling. Looking at the horrifying scene before him, Hajime was overwhelmed with helplessness. As he remembered the faith and expectations Ruriko had placed in him, he swore to bring the murderer to justice no matter what. Very quickly, Hajime learned from Inspector Isamu that Ruriko's estimated time of death was between 9 and 10 p.m. the previous night, and that time frame just so happened to match the exact moment when Hajime saw the mysterious masked man. Afterward, Hajime told Isamu everything that had happened the night before. At the same time, he pointed out the strangest part of the case. It had taken him and Ryoso only a few seconds to run from the new school building to the old one, yet by the time they opened the door, everything inside had somehow returned to normal. Hajime could not understand how the killer managed, in such a short amount of time, to move Ruriko's body and neatly rearrange all the desks and chairs. Inspector Isamu believed the killer escaped through the window, but Hajime immediately rejected that theory because every window in the classroom had been locked. At that moment, Ichiro suddenly spoke up in fear. He insisted that Ruriko's death must have been caused by the man calling himself the magician back before the new school building had been constructed. A security guard once entered the classroom alone late at night, but the moment he opened the door, he saw corpses scattered everywhere inside the room, and in the middle of all those bodies, there was an ugly-looking man crouching on the floor. After that incident, the security guard mysteriously disappeared as well. When others later rushed into the classroom, all they found written on the wall in blood was a message left by the magician. It read, "I will live in this school building forever." Ichiro's story left everyone present visibly terrified, but Inspector Isamu knew this was not some supernatural event. It was a real murder case. Even so, he still could not figure out how the killer managed to move the body. At that moment, Makoto suddenly put on an arrogant expression. He glanced toward the reporters behind him. Before smugly beginning his explanation, Makoto stated that according to footage recorded by Ryuta's camera, although Hajime and Ryoso had reached the old school building within seconds, there was actually a 5-minute gap before they opened the classroom door. During that time, the killer had more than enough opportunity to move the body. Makoto claimed the killer escaped through the window. The murderer had supposedly tied a rope to the window latch beforehand, then threaded the other end through the ventilation opening. After committing the crime, the killer simply pulled the rope from outside the window, causing the latch to lock automatically. Makoto confidently declared that if the police investigated carefully, they would definitely find traces left around the vent. And just as he predicted, the police later discovered marks near the ventilation opening. Afterward, Makoto immediately began mocking Hajime, but Hajime did not argue back. Instead, he quietly fell deep into thought. That evening, Hajime suddenly remembered something important. Earlier, Ruriko had mentioned that a notebook and a CD were crucial clues, but now, both items had disappeared. Because of this, Hajime suspected that before Ruriko was killed, she must have discovered something important hidden within the notebook and CD. Hajime did not agree with Makoto's theory. He believed the killer would never carelessly leave behind such obvious evidence. What confused Hajime the most was why the killer went so far to make the crime scene appear supernatural, and why was the killer so desperate to prevent the demolition of the old school building. As for these questions, Hajime soon discovered new leads. From Inspector Isamu, he learned that 10 years ago, a girl named Chihiro had also disappeared while investigating these same incidents. However, before Hajime could continue his investigation, another murder occurred at the school early the next morning, and this time, the victim was Takahiro, a member of the Supernatural Phenomena Research Club. According to the investigation, Takahiro died from a heavy blow to the head, and in his hand, the police discovered a key. Ryoso immediately recognized it as the key to the biology classroom. The moment the principal heard that, he rushed in panic into the room. He too believed that all of these incidents were the work of the magician. To prevent any more tragedies, the principal decided to stop the demolition of the old school building altogether. Earlier, Hajime had noticed that there was very little blood around Takahiro's head wound. Because of this, He suspected that the copy room was not the original crime scene. While speaking, Hajime suddenly noticed the nearby computer. He immediately walked over to inspect it. Sure enough, there were traces of blood on the keyboard. It was obvious now that this was the true primary crime scene. Hajime instantly formed a theory. He suspected that Takahiro had taken the notebook and the CD, and while he was checking the contents of the disc, the killer attacked him from behind. Hajime wanted to see what was on the CD, only to discover that it had already been damaged. Just then, the room door suddenly slammed shut. Hajime quickly chased after the person outside, but the one he encountered was the security guard Ryoso. As Hajime approached him, he realized Ryoso was holding the missing notebook. Ryoso immediately handed the notebook over to Hajime. Afterward, they headed to the rooftop. Miyuki began reading the contents of the notebook aloud to Hajime. During the process, Hajime unexpectedly learned that the notebook had originally belonged to the missing girl, Chihiro. Inside the notebook, Chihiro clearly stated that there had originally been only 6 supernatural mysteries in the old school building, not 7, and those 6 incidents all seemed connected to the building's former identity as the Takata Pharmaceutical Institute. At that moment, Miyuki suddenly noticed that there was also a photo of Chihiro at the end of the notebook. Attached to the photo was a note. It had clearly been left behind by Ruriko, and written on the note were several strange coded messages. Hajime immediately decided to ask Inspector Isamu to investigate the Takata Pharmaceutical Institute. But just then, Miyuki realized she had lost her handkerchief, so she returned alone to the research room. However, 10 minutes passed, and Hajime, who was waiting downstairs, still had not seen Miyuki return. He hurried toward the research room himself, but the moment he entered the room, Hajime suddenly discovered a pool of blood on the floor. Just then, Ryota walked into the room. Hajime quickly asked him what the third supernatural incident was. When Hajime learned it was called the blood-sucking well, he immediately rushed to the old well behind the abandoned school building. Sure enough, they found Miyuki unconscious beside the well. Miyuki was quickly taken to the hospital. While she was being treated, Isamu came to speak with Hajime. He told him that 30 years ago, the old school building really had been the Takata Pharmaceutical Institute, and back then, 6 people had mysteriously disappeared there late at night. Isamu believed those disappearances were definitely connected to the recent murders. After emergency treatment, Miyuki was finally out of danger, but at that moment, the bright sunlight shining through the window hurt her eyes, so she asked Hajime to close the curtains for her. However, the instant Hajime reached out to pull the curtain shut, he suddenly realized the truth behind everything. He immediately rushed back to the research room. Then he entered every coded message from the note into the computer. After a series of operations, he finally deciphered all the codes. At the same time, he suddenly remembered something Miyuki had told him earlier. When she was attacked, she had been trying to tear down a poster from the wall. Thinking back on that, Hajime slowly turned toward Makoto's poster. Then he walked over and ripped it down in one motion. What was hidden behind the poster instantly sent chills down Hajime's spine. At that moment, Hajime finally understood the entire truth behind the case. Afterward, he gathered everyone involved together. Then, in front of them all, he recreated the scene of the disappearing corpse. Once he removed his mask, he began explaining his deductions. The murderer, calling himself the magician, was actually one of the people standing right there among them. In truth, the killer had never entered the biology classroom at all. The so-called death ritual had actually taken place inside the physics classroom. Hajime opened the door to the physics room. Sure enough, a mannequin was hanging inside, but from the new school building, it should have been impossible to see inside the physics classroom. Hajime then brought over a massive mirror. He explained that as long as the killer placed the mirror at just the right angle, the people in the new school building would see the reflection of the physics classroom and mistake it for the biology classroom. Before everyone arrived, the killer would simply remove the mirror. Then, after everyone gathered at the scene, the killer could casually blend into the crowd without suspicion. After everyone left, the killer transferred Ruriko's body into the biology classroom. Then, using the same window-locking trick Makoto had explained earlier, the killer escaped the room and made it seem as though he had fled through the window. And the only person capable of doing all this that night was none other than the physics teacher Ichiro. Ichiro immediately tried to defend himself, claiming he had no reason to murder his own students, but Hajime stated that Ichiro had been hiding the truth from 30 years ago. Back then, Takata Pharmaceutical Institute possessed a large number of experimental drugs. In order to test those drugs, The institute hired 6 people as test subjects, but the experiments failed, and all 6 of them died. To cover up the scandal, the researchers demolished the original institute building, constructed a new structure over it, and sealed the 6 bodies inside the walls. Afterward, they donated the building to the high school free of charge, to make absolutely certain nobody would discover the truth. They even spread 6 supernatural rumors connected to the locations where the bodies were hidden, to scare students away from those areas. As for the so-called 7th supernatural incident, it actually originated 10 years ago, with the girl named Chihiro who investigated the mystery on her own. After discovering the truth, she too was sealed inside the wall by the killer, thus creating the 7th supernatural incident. But Ichiro never expected the principal would decide to demolish the old school building, so in order to protect the secret, he sent threatening letters to the principal, and the evidence proving everything was hidden inside the coded messages Ruriko left behind. Hajime then turned on the computer. Words suddenly appeared on the screen. There are skeletons buried inside the walls. Immediately afterward, Hajime tore the poster off the wall, and behind the poster, inside a hole in the wall, was a human skeleton. Seeing this, memories from 10 years ago flooded back into Ichiro's mind. Back then, Chihiro had uncovered the entire truth. Ichiro tried to stop her from reporting it to the police, but Chihiro refused. During the struggle, Chihiro became emotionally overwhelmed. She lost her footing and fell down the stairs. Thinking back on it, Ichiro collapsed to his knees on the spot. He told everyone that he never originally intended to kill Ruriko, but after Ruriko discovered the truth, he felt he had no choice but to silence her. Then Takahiro uncovered the truth through the disc as well, so Ichiro attacked him too. As for Miyuki, she became a target because she tried to tear down the poster. Just then, Ryoso suddenly grabbed a pair of scissors and lunged at Ichiro in rage. Isamu quickly rushed forward and pulled Ryoso away. That was when Hajime finally revealed Ryoso's true identity. The school security guard Ryoso was actually Chihiro's father. Hajime tried to calm him down. Even if he killed Ichiro, Chihiro would never come back. Hearing those words, Ryoso collapsed to the ground in tears. But at that moment, Ichiro's cries for help suddenly echoed from behind Hajime. He desperately screamed for someone to save him. Yet not long after, his voice suddenly fell silent. In the end, under police supervision, the old school building was finally demolished, and hidden within it, the authorities discovered 7 bodies.